Hey, good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. Morning, class. Merry Christmas. We're really glad that you are here this morning. Today is just really relaxed, really laid back. If you have your PJs, please keep them on at all times. But we have snacks on the table. We don't have donuts this morning, but we have snacks. And if you're wondering why there's a little flame, it's for s'mores. You have, what are those things called? I want to say Cracker Jacks, graham crackers. Here's a fun fact, by the way. I've never eaten a s'more, so sort of a strange thing about me. But you can enjoy s'mores during the time that we're getting together. It's just really laid back and relaxed today. Enjoy your friends. If you're here for the first time, and by the way, if you're back in the back, you need a place to sit. There's a table up here to the left. It doesn't have a poinsettia or a s'more station, but you can go to another table and grab some s'mores there. But if you have kids, if you've never been here before, if you have kids and you want to check them in, check-in is still open back there. You can, I have to have my, okay. You'll do it from up here. The person that flips our slides, her child was sick today. If you have kids, you can check them in back there. They're playing lots of games, eating lots of candy, doing some fun things back there. If you have your child here with you, I don't know, do we have the family room today? Jeannie, is the family room open today or no? I don't know what she said, but I think she said we can open it. If you need some private time with your child, we have a family room right there that's next to check-in. You can go back there and you can still sort of participate with us. You can see what's going on there. We have a gift for you. Hey, it's Christmas time, but we do this every Sunday. We have a book called How Good is Good Enough. If you have questions about God, Jesus, the Bible, maybe you haven't been in church for a while, or you've been in church for a long time and you still have questions, this book is a great place to start. It's a good gift to give to some of your friends that might have some questions about who God is and what this whole Jesus thing is about. I think we still have some 4 Pulaski t-shirts back there. We've been giving these away the last few weeks, but don't even have to wait till the meeting's over. You can go back there to the Welcome Center. It's right around the booth, and say, hey, I'd like a free t-shirt, and we'll give you a free t-shirt. And I'm pretty sure that's it. We're going to be together. We may not even make it 70 minutes. Usually every Sunday we're together about 70 minutes or so. It may even be shorter. It would be a Christmas miracle, but it could happen today. But we're just really glad you're here. Relax. We're going to sing a few songs, watch a few videos, and then I'm going to share the Christmas story and probably ruin it for some of you. So it's going to be a great day. Thanks for being here.
Well, happy birthday, Jesus. Sorry your party's so lame.
Oh, no. You know what? That's totally my bad. You mentioned we don't have the person typically running slides. I'm the person running slides, and I just played a video with no audio. If you don't watch The Office, you should. You're missing out on a great bit of comedy. But anyways, we're going to sing a couple songs. This first one you'll be half familiar with. You may not know part of it, but it's really easy to sing along with. So loud and proud, it's Christmas.
Little
Thank you. Okay.
Can hear some of you out there. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Join in if you know them.
Okay. Oh, come all you faithful. You should know this.
Come, all ye faithful, joyful and triumphant. Oh, come ye to Bethlehem. Come and behold him, born the King of angels. Oh, come, let us adore him. Come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him, Christ the Lord. Sing, choir of angels, sing in exaltation. Sing, all ye citizens of heaven. Glory to God, all glory in the highest. Oh, come, let us adore him. Oh, come, let us adore him. Come, let us adore him, Christ the Lord.
Thank you. Thank you so much for singing with us. Yeah, you can clap. Clap for yourselves. Thank you for hanging out. Nick, if I could have you click that video, and Sam or Mark, if I could have you push the iMac up to Unity on the board. I'm also short a sound guy today. Stuff happens. It's the holiday season. I'm happy about it. Are y'all happy to be here today?
My name is Elizabeth, and I'm 5 years old, and I'm in kindergarten. I'm going to tell you how Jesus got born. The Bible says that there's an angel called Gabriel, and Mary was so scared. Gabriel said, God sent me on a journal because I need to tell Mary something. Don't be scared. I need to tell you something. And then comes it's gonna be a boy, and you are gonna name him Jesus. He is God's son. Joseph, I'm having a baby. I was wondering if you could carry me to take me to Bethlehem, and he wasn't even tired. They donated to a city named Bethlehem. Can I please stay here? There was no room in the guest rooms. You can stay here in the stable. And so they had to travel into a stable in Bethlehem. Joseph, I feel like I'm gonna have a baby now.
When Mary and Joseph got to the manger, what happened?
They didn't tell me.
You know what happened. You know Jesus got born.
Jesus got born.
Yeah. So what has to happen for a baby to be born?
It has to come out of the It has to come out of the belly.
Yeah. Is that difficult for a mom?
No. She had a baby, and then there were 3 wise men who followed a star who saw a star to see Jesus. So, and then music from angels said it, and then they found Jesus, and they said, "Can you please, Jesus?" And then they gave frankincense, gold, and more. And Jesus didn't care about those presents. The only present that he gives is love. And then they prayed to God. And then when he grew up, the king attacked them.
Oh my gosh.
And then they put him on a cross and he went to heaven. He was always there for us. And that was how the baby went to heaven.
So that was Elizabeth's version of the Christmas story. We're gonna, it's actually one of my favorite things to do, is to talk about the Christmas story. Of course, I only get to do it usually once a year. It was something, when my kids were growing up, it was always this conflict, and there's conflicting stories about what actually happened in our house. On Christmas morning, we would open presents, and wanting, I guess, somehow to teach them that, the reason we do this is it's Jesus' birthday. And I wanted to share the Christmas story, so I always wanted them to wait and let me read the Christmas story, and then we open presents. Well, especially when they were younger, number one, they didn't care about listening to me read, and so I say we never got through the Christmas story. They tell the story that they had to, endure listening to me read, and I hated to torture my children with the Bible on Jesus' birthday and make them hate Jesus. So I say we never got through. They say we always got through. Of course, I'm right. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to torture you with the Christmas story. But there's some things about the Christmas story that some of you probably know. If you've been here every year, I talk about these things. We talk about a little different aspect every time. But there's things about the Christmas story that to non-believers and skeptics, which I am a skeptic, they just don't add up. And there's traditions. Christmas is a time that's full of traditions anyway. You have traditions about when you open presents. How many of you have already opened presents? Anybody have their Christmas right there? See, we had with our kids, were there last night opening presents. We used to do it on Christmas Day, but we've been relegated to the week before now. How many of you are Christmas Eve people? Christmas Eve open presents? When I grew up, we had to wait till it was completely dark, the sun was down, then we could open presents. We could negotiate one present usually an hour before the sunset, but we were always Christmas Eve people. So that's one reason there's children here. That's too bad. I never believed in certain people bringing us presents because we always opened presents before we could possibly get there. So how many of you are Christmas morning people? Look at that. You are traditionalists. So there's all kinds of traditions around Christmas, and there are certain traditions, even with the story in the Bible, that cause people that maybe don't know Jesus and are skeptical of this whole Jesus thing to say it's not true. And one of them is, this is a meme I saw on social media a couple years ago, and it says the fact that there are two different nativity stories being the birth of Jesus, suggests that at least one was made up. Now, what do they mean, two nativity stories? There's Matthew's account where Mary and Joseph, Jesus is born. They actually live in Bethlehem. They give birth to Jesus in Bethlehem. And as soon as he is born, wise men show up. And that night they flee to Egypt and leave there and stay there with the baby Jesus. Luke, Mary and Joseph live in Nazareth. They travel to Bethlehem, and because of a census, and Jesus was born there in a manger. And there is a certain thing that happens that cause skeptics to not believe these two accounts. And so we're going to talk about that today. I'm going to go real quickly through this first part because we talked about it last week. But just for those of you that weren't here, and maybe just to recap a little bit, Matthew, who was a disciple of Jesus, who was amazingly impacted by the life of Jesus. And that's really important as you read these stories, that Matthew's life was revolutionized by his experience with this carpenter from Nazareth. Changed his entire outlook on who God is. And so he's trying to explain the story to some people in the first century, and he says this is a record. He starts out with the genealogy. This is a record of Jesus, the Messiah, a descendant of David and of Abraham. Then he goes through a long list of so-and-so begat so-and-so who begat so-and-so, the stories that we never pay attention to in the Bible because it's just talking about people having babies and those babies having babies and those babies having babies. Why do we care? Well, Matthew is trying to make, with everything he says in these first two chapters, he's not simply trying to give you, well, here's a history, here's his birthright, here's how he came to be. He's not trying to do that. He's trying to make a point about who he is. He's trying to explain his experience with Jesus by using some very common first century things. It wouldn't make sense to a 21st person to do things this way, but Matthew's not interested in getting all the genealogy right. In fact, he gets it wrong. This is one of the things that atheists or skeptics will say, and rightly so. They're thinking with the 21st century mentality. But Matthew says he lists all this genealogy and says it includes 14 generations from Abraham to David. 14 from David to the Babylonian exile. Well, the Babylonian exile is not a person having a baby, it's an event. It's the most important event in the nation of Israel's history, is the time that they were exiled, taken captive by Babylon. It affected their national psyche. Everything they thought about their relationship with God centers around the fact that they believed God forsook them because of their sin, and God doesn't really care for them anymore because they're still being occupied by an army just like they were exiled to Babylon. And 14 generations from the Babylonian exile to the Messiah. Messiah is just a Jewish way of saying king. They expected that Jesus would come. No, they didn't know it was Jesus. They expected that a person would come and would assume the throne of David, because David was promised, there will always be someone from your lineage, from your progeny, to sit on the throne of Israel. Matthew's audience is Jews, particularly. His message is that Jesus is the king, and he's coming to bring us back from exile. He starts with even the begats, the lineage, the genealogy, to explain that. He uses a principle, he wouldn't have known this word, of course, gematria, where letters in the alphabet have a numerical value. Roman numerals, the I equals what? 1. The V equals what? See, all the guys know because they know it's Super Bowl something. They have to learn Roman numerals to even be able to watch football. X is what? There you go. M is what? You know there really was no M, by the way. Scholars believe that it was 2 D's back to back that we interpreted as an M, D being 500. It's interesting. Here's a side note, by the way. If you add up all the Roman numerals, excluding M, which scholars say they're, see, he's excited. If you add up all the Roman numerals, I, V, X, L, whatever the rest of them are, do you know what the number comes to? 666. Okay, we'll talk about that later. Just wanted to throw that out there on this wonderful Christmas day. But Matthew, in this case, is using this because David's name, which is spelled without consonants, DVD, equals 14. He's trying to say that Jesus is somehow a king that is continuing the promise of David, that this person has been promised to us, and here he is. There's not 14 generations between those things that he mentions. He gets it wrong intentionally to make a point about who Jesus is. And then he goes on and he begins to tell the story. This is how Jesus, the Messiah, was born. His mother Mary was engaged to be married to Joseph. But before the marriage took place, while she was still a virgin, just for fun in church, let's say virgin, she became pregnant through the power of the Holy Spirit. Joseph thinks, yeah, that's a likely story. And so her fiance was a good man. He didn't want to disgrace her publicly because he believes Mary has had an affair of some sort, but I don't want to have her stoned or disgrace her, so I'm just going to break this off quietly. As he considered this, the angel of the Lord appeared to him, Joseph, son of David. The angel said, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child that was conceived is conceived by the Holy Spirit. She'll have a son, and you're to name him Jesus. In the Hebrew, it was simply Joshua. It wasn't a big special name. Lots and lots of boys were named Joshua. But Matthew is trying to show, even his name means that he's going to save us from sins. And like we said last week, there's a whole thing about that we won't talk about today. But maybe I will talk about it a little bit, because the thing that was binding up people, the thing that was hindering people from knowing God, was this idea that we've sinned, so we've been exiled. And they still feel like they're apart from God because we're still not back in our land. We're still not a sovereign nation. The Israeli mindset was God doesn't like us because of our sins. It was that idea that was separating them from God. And Jesus came to show them, you don't have to try to do better and reach me and try to get to some place where nationally you're doing everything right, so I'm going to deliver you from this Roman occupation. I have a much greater goal, and that's simply a relationship with you. I'm going to save you from this idea that your sins are separating you from God. All of this occurred, and this is important. These words to fulfill the Lord's message through his prophet. We talked about this a lot last week. You can find this on Facebook, on our website. But Matthew then quotes a verse from Isaiah. Look, the virgin will conceive a child, she'll give birth to a son, they'll call his name Emmanuel, which means God is with us. Matthew is not saying that Isaiah was predicting Jesus, because he goes back and looks at Isaiah. We talked about this last week. There's a whole event that happens where the king of Syria, the king of northern Israel, was about to attack Judah. God shows up through Isaiah. Here's a map of that happening. You have to look at the map. Here's Assyria. Here's these northern kings. Here's Judah. These two kings were about to attack them, so they would join them and attack them. Another boring history lesson. But God said to Ahaz, ask for a sign to show that I'm going to help you in this situation. Make it as difficult as you want, as high as the heaven. Ahaz says no. God says, all right, I'll give you a sign. The virgin, which in the Hebrew is not the word virgin, it's just a young woman. In fact, in the Hebrew, it's not saying a virgin will conceive, it's saying a young woman has already conceived. And by the time, and we're going to call him Emmanuel, by the time that child is old enough to choose what's right and wrong, he'll be eating yogurt and honey, which is peacetime food. It's not food that you eat in a siege. You were able to go out into the field and gather honey. You were able to have cows that are producing dairy for you to produce yogurt. Everything is going to be fine. For before that child is old enough, the lands of the two kings that you fear will be deserted. This is an actual event where God is saying to the nation of Israel, I got you. I'm with you. Stop worrying. Stop being afraid. I'm just going to skip this next verse or I'll really get to talking about it. This practice is called midrash. It's something that first century rabbis, which Matthew would have been, instead of looking at the Old Testament and trying to find where it's predicting Jesus, and that's what Christians do. They tell their friends, look, it's predicting Jesus. No, it's not. What Matthew is doing is going back into the Old Testament. He's reinterpreting the Old Testament because of his radical experience with Jesus, and he's trying to explain to people, God isn't at all what we thought he was, but remember that time where God was with the nation of Israel? Remember that time where God protected us and it was like, no, I'm right here with you. You don't have to look to Egypt to help you. You don't have to worry. That's who Jesus is. He's right. He came to us. So when Joseph woke up, he did as the angel of the Lord commanded, took Mary as his wife, but he did not have sexual relationship with her until her son was born. That's where I often say, there's the real Christmas miracle. And Joseph named him Jesus. Now, we have another Christmas story, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but there's a conflict that happens that non-believers point to say one of these stories has to be made up because they're not jiving here. In Luke, we won't go through the whole thing. Elizabeth sort of explained it to you. Mary and Joseph traveled to Bethlehem. There's no room for them in the inn. We think that they gave birth in a barn. It was actually probably the lower level of a family house because Joseph was from Bethlehem, where they kept the animals. They brought the animals inside, which is kind of cool. I mean, we bring our dogs inside now. They just happen to bring their donkeys and sheep inside. But she gave birth to her first child, a son. She wrapped him snugly in strips of old cloth. Did it say old cloth? No, cloth, and laid him in a manger. Well, now it's 2,000 years ago, so it's old cloth, because there was no lodging available for them. Now, here begins the problem. That's cool. Isn't that lovely? There's baby Jesus. 8 days later. Whoops. Is this where I'm supposed to sing? Have yourself a merry little Christmas? 8 days later. There we go. 8 days later. When the baby was circumcised, he was named Jesus, the name given him by the angel even before he was conceived. Everything's kind of all right so far. But then it was time for their purification offering. How many of you know what a purification offering is? See, you can watch The Grinch, but you can't read your Bible. It's in the book of Leviticus. One of my favorite books, not really. In the book of Leviticus, after a woman has a son, she has to, 40 days later, she sort of has to stay away from everybody. That's the way they thought. A woman had a child. We can't even touch her for 40 days. Stay away from her, she's unclean. So 40 days after that, if you had a daughter, you had to wait 80 days. Because girls are worth twice as much. Or girls are twice as difficult, whichever the two you want to interpret that. But you had to wait for 80 days, but 40 days later, you had to go to the temple and you had to offer a sacrifice. And then you would be ceremonially clean from your childbirth. So in Luke, this is what's happening. It was the time for their purification offering as required by the law of Moses after the birth of a child. So his parents took him to Jerusalem, which is right up the road from Bethlehem, 4 or 5 miles, to present him to the Lord. Okay? You see any problem with that? Anybody? Well, skeptics see a big problem with that. Because Matthew says, Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea. Everything's fine so far. And during the reign of King Herod, about that time, some wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem. Now, if you've ever seen a nativity scene, and you maybe go to a living nativity scene and they have a camel there, maybe it's always great when they can actually have a camel. Or they have donkeys and they have sheep and it's cold and they have shepherds there and they always have wise men there at the stable where Jesus was born. The trouble with that is the wise men weren't at the stable where Jesus was born. And it's more than just that, but that's something that Christians should know. I don't want to mess up your nativity scene. I don't want to even, don't change what you have. I saw on Facebook the other day that someone had taken like Yoda and put him in the place of Joseph in there. And on the post they said, it's been there for 2 weeks and mom hasn't even noticed. So however you want to do your nativity scene, put the wise men there, put the camel there, I don't care. But that is a tradition that's not necessarily the way it was, and it matters. Because these wise men from eastern lands arrived in Jerusalem. Now, these wise men are, the word is magi. We get our word magic from this word magi. They were astrologers, they were scientists of the day, but more than that, and some of you, when I say wise men, how many do you have in your mind? 3. Why? Because the song. That's right. We 3 kings of Orient are trying to smoke a rubber cigar. Just things I learned in church growing up. But there's nothing in the Bible that says there were 3. There were 3 gifts, but there's nothing that says there were 3. And from what we will see in this story, it's very improbable that it would have just been 3. But historically, the Magi are from the area where Babylon, where the nation of Israel was exiled to, from the area of Babylon, present-day Iraq. They've traveled a long way because they saw some sort of astronomical thing in the sky. They see this star. It's going to take them a while to get there, number one. But these guys are more than just 3 guys riding on camels. In fact, they probably weren't riding on camels. These were, in the Parthian Empire at the time, they would sort of be a cross between senators and the Supreme Court. They were the ones that decided who became the king of their empire. The Parthian Empire is at odds with the Roman Empire. And we'll talk about that a little more as we go on. It should start to make sense. But these guys arrived in Jerusalem, and we'll talk about how they arrived in a minute. Where is the newborn King of the Jews? We saw his star as it rose, and we've come to worship him. Now, we have to think a little bit about this as we go. Why in the world would they see a star and think, oh, I bet there's a new King of the Jews? Why would they think that? Have you ever stopped? Most of the time, we don't stop and think about the Christmas story because it's what our dad reads before we open presents, and we just don't care. But there's so much that Matthew is trying to explain about Jesus here that we need to stop and think about it. Why would these magi, these senators who are like the administration, the authority in the Parthian Empire, who are the ones that decide who becomes king? A king is nominated, they have a search committee, they go out, they vote on it, they decide what various laws are made and what laws are followed. Why would they say there's King of the Jews? Now, King Herod was deeply disturbed, and everyone in Jerusalem. Now, wait a minute. Jerusalem is about the size of Waynesville, St. Robert, about the same amount of people. If 3 guys sneak in the night on camels, now if they were on camels, word might get around, but if 3 guys sneak into the night on St. Robert, why is everyone deeply disturbed? The reason they're deeply disturbed is because these aren't 3 guys riding camels. They were probably traveling with an entourage of about 1,000 soldiers on horses. It's the Secret Service for these high-ranking members of a world empire that have come into Jerusalem, and everyone knows these are the guys that are the kingmakers of the Parthian Empire. Parthia, we get to use another map. Parthia is right there, of course. This is the Roman Empire. The little star right there is that's Israel. Over the past 100 years or so, there have been conflicts, skirmishes, battles between Parthia and the Roman Empire. They've happened a lot right here in the middle as Parthia tries to expand to the west and Rome tries to expand to the east. So these people show up, 1,000 people on horses, these guys that have been recently we've been at battle with, and they're trying to find a new king because their king recently died. So they're looking for a new king, and they show up, and so everyone is really troubled. These magi, here we can see from the Bible, they're wise advisors. That word wise advisors is magi. This is in the book of Esther, who knew all the Persian laws and customs. He, the king, this is talking about a king named Ahasuerus. If you're pregnant, want to name your son something from the Bible, Ahasuerus is a great choice. Ahasuerus consults with the Magi. They know the laws, the customs. He always asks their advice. They are sort of the man behind the curtain running the empire, this group of people. In Daniel, this is hundreds of years before these magi show up. Daniel is in Babylon during the exile. When Israel was away from their land, when they believe God has forsaken them, Daniel is one of the people that was exiled. Nebuchadnezzar, who was a king, had a dream one night, and he didn't understand it. And so he calls for the chief. Daniel figures out what the dream is, so he made him the chief over all the magicians. That's the magi. These are those wise men. So hundreds of years before these wise men show up at the birth of Jesus, there's a Jew named Daniel that becomes in charge of all the scientists in Babylon. Daniel has an experience with an angel where this angel tells him that an anointed one is going to come in a certain amount of time. The Hebrew way of expressing it is in weeks. It means 7 years of 7. In other words, in about 460 to 490 years, an anointed one is going to come, a ruler, a king is going to come, guys. And he begins to tell him about this prediction of a king, a Messiah, hundreds of years before Jesus is born. This is the reason why this teaching is kept alive with the Magi, to let them know around this time, be looking, there's going to be some sort of sign. We don't know what it is, but a king is coming, and he's going to be in Israel. So along about the time, they see this weird thing happening in the sky. I don't know what it is. That's a whole other discussion. But that's why they show up all of a sudden saying, where's this king? Because we've been knowing this in Babylon for hundreds of years. So Herod, the king, flashback to the first century, he called a meeting of the leading priests and teachers of religious law and asked, where's the Messiah supposed to be born? They quote Micah and say, in Bethlehem in Judea, for this is what the prophet wrote, Bethlehem, you're the least among the ruling cities, but a ruler will come from you, and he'll be the shepherd for my people Israel. There must have been something about the star that got them to Jerusalem, but it didn't, at that moment anyway, lead them right to the house, because they have to stop and ask directions. These aren't typical men. They're lost. They don't know where Jesus is. So they stop by and say, hey, do you guys know where he is? And so Herod calls the private meeting with the wise men, and he learned from them, and this is important, the time. You mind to say that word with me? Time. He wants to know, what time did the star first appear? Why does he want to know that? Then he told them to go to Bethlehem, search carefully for the child, not baby, child. When you find him, come back and tell me so I can go and worship him too. Okay, so they entered the house, and saw the child. It wasn't in a manger. They saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshiped him. Then they opened their treasure chests and gave him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. So here the wise men show up, and they find Jesus in a house as a child. They give him gifts. When it was time to leave, they returned to their own country by another route, for God had warned them in a dream. So much I'd love to say about that. Time's too short. Not to return to Herod. After the wise men were gone. So in our mind, Christian tradition in the United States, well, the wise men show up on the night Jesus was born. They're there in the stable with Mary. Somebody took a picture, and that's what we have in our Bibles today, a picture of the wise men with the shepherds. So that's what we do. After the wise men were gone, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream and said, get up, flee to Egypt with the child and his mother. Stay there until I tell you to return, because Herod is going to search for the child to kill him. That night, Joseph left for Egypt with the child and Mary, his mother, and they stayed there until Herod's death. By the way, Herod died either in 4 BC or 1 BC. The calendar's off. Jesus was actually born probably 6 before Christ. The calendar's off. You guys don't care. But anyway, that night he left for Egypt, and he stayed there until Herod's death. Now, I just have to stop and point this out. But hold that right there, that he stayed there until Herod's death. He left that night, right after the wise men were there. Wise men leave, get up, we're going to Egypt. Mary's like, I've been entertaining all evening. We have to go tonight? Yes, we have to go tonight. They got up and they go to Egypt that night. Hold that right there. But notice this fulfilled what the Lord had spoken through the prophet. I called my son out of Egypt. Now, Matthew uses this word fulfilled, and we think, well, there was a prediction, and this somehow met the prediction criteria. But that's not what this word fulfilled means, especially because what Matthew is quoting comes from Hosea. When Israel was a child, I loved him, and I called my son out of Egypt. Hosea is talking about Israel, not Jesus. And Hosea, writing hundreds of years before the time of Jesus, isn't predicting, he's recollecting. He's looking backward hundreds of years before his time when God brought Israel out of Egypt. This is not a prediction. When Matthew says it predicts, when it fulfills something from the Old Testament, what he's trying to do is, how do I describe Jesus? You know how God delivered us as a nation out of Egypt? You remember how we were under the control of someone else in Egypt? You remember that, how it was a miracle, how God was with us in that situation? The story of Israel culminates in the life of Jesus. This was the whole purpose of Israel to begin with. It's not that we were some special people, that God just loves us no matter what we do, which he does love us no matter what we do, but our purpose was to share who God is with the rest of the world. It's not just about us. But remember how God took us out of Egypt? He told us to be a light to the world. That's who Jesus is. He's the end of that story. He's the reason we exist, is to serve and worship him and to join him in his mission to share who God is with the world. Whoops. No. It shouldn't go there. Anyway, there we are. But the more I called to him, the further he moved away from me, talking about Israel. So Herod was furious. But now here's the problem. Here's the problem. We read from Luke that Mary went to the temple 40 days after Jesus was born and presented a sacrifice in the temple in Jerusalem. If she presented Jesus in the temple 40 days after Jesus was born, how did she do that if they were in Egypt until Herod died? Do you see it? Because this is what skeptics say. Well, Luke says she was at the temple 40 days later. Matthew says she left for Egypt that night. One of these stories has to be wrong. But the story isn't wrong because we see next that Herod was furious when he realized that the wise men had outwitted him. He sent soldiers to kill all the boys in and around Bethlehem who were, how old? 2 years old. Why did he pick 2 years old? Based on the wise men's report of the star's first appearance. If the star appeared on the night that Jesus was born, it took them a long time to gather everything, prepare for the journey, get there from 600 miles away. It's been close to 2 years, perhaps. Jesus is a child. Mary and Joseph travel from Nazareth, where Joseph is working. He goes back to his hometown. They have the baby, and they just stay with mom and dad. If you've ever had your first child and you've lived close to grandparents, you know it's hard to move away unless the grandparents drive you absolutely crazy. It's so nice to have the grandparents there. They stayed in Bethlehem, and almost 2 years later, the wise men show up. It's no conflict. It's not two different stories. Matthew's telling what happened later. He already told you in Matthew 1, this is how Jesus was born. And now, in about that time, it starts in Matthew. And people will say, yeah, about the time Jesus was born. Well, Matthew in the next chapter says basically, about that time, John the Baptist began to preach. That's 30 years later. When a Hebrew says, about that time, have you ever been in a foreign country, like in Central America, maybe? Anybody been in Central South America? Nobody? Oh, some of you. I remember we went to Belize, and we had to pour concrete. We were doing this construction project at a missionaries complex. We had to pour concrete, and we found a guy that had a mixer, so we didn't have to mix it ourselves. And we said, we need you to be here tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. Si, senor. Yes, be there. 8 o'clock. You got it? Well, he showed up at 2 and had no concept that he was late. It's just time is just, it's kind of a suggestion. That's the way the Hebrews are. When they say about that time wise men came, it doesn't mean it's the same night. But here we see, because of that time, it was a house, it was later, it's not two different stories. But here's something Matthew's communicating. Kings kill their enemies. Herod is the king. He perceives a threat, and he's killing everyone to get at his enemy. The whole point of Matthew's entire gospel, and the whole point of Christmas, which this isn't Christmas time, Matthew's story, is that there's a new king. There's a new sheriff in town, and he's entirely different. He doesn't rule by force and evil, by harming people. He rules an entirely different way, and it's not just for Israel. Our exile is over because he's starting a brand new kingdom that everyone gets to be a part of. So the family, and we're almost done, the family went and lived in a town called Nazareth. Again, Matthew uses this phrase. This fulfilled what the prophets had said. He will be called a Nazarene. Now, if you're ever talking with a Jewish person and you're trying to convince them that the Old Testament is somehow predicting the birth of Jesus, if they know their Old Testament, which to them it's not the Old Testament, it's just the Bible, to them, they will say, okay, Matthew says that there's a prediction in the Old Testament that says Jesus will be called a Nazarene. And Christians will say, yeah. And they will say, show me that scripture. And you won't be able to, because you just watched The Grinch, you didn't read your Bible. But if you read the entire Bible, you wouldn't be able to show them because it's not in there. Matthew isn't saying the Old Testament predicts. He's trying to make a point about who Jesus is. This word, he'll be called a Nazarene, is a play on words. It's almost a pun, where he's using this word netzer. It means a shoot or a branch. There aren't vowels in the Hebrew. It's NZR. Well, there's NZR. It almost sounds like, it's almost spelled like in the Hebrew, like Nazareth. It sounds very similar, actually, in Aramaic. He's saying he will be called a netzer. This word, here's a picture of that word. It means there's a stump that has been cut off and a new tree is growing out of it. Happens all the time. Isaiah 11 says, out of the stump of David's family, remember Matthew started with the genealogy that said there's 14 generations. David's name spells 14. He's a new king that's coming. The old kind of king kills everybody, but there's a new Messiah. These guys came from Babylon saying, where's the new king? The whole point is there's a new king. Our old way of thinking about God, our old way of thinking we have to be a nation where we force everybody to do the law of God has been cut off, but there's a new branch growing. Out of the stump of David's family will grow a shoot. That word is netzer. This is what Matthew's referring to. He's going back into the Old Testament with his Jewish audience and say, you know how it was promised that even though David's family was cut off, that there would be a new shoot? Guess what? He's here. A new branch bearing fruit from the old root. And Matthew's saying, there's a new beginning of a new type of kingdom with a new type of king. That's the entire point of Jesus' birth. And that's all I have. It only took about 35 minutes. See, what if you were children waiting to get your presents open and you had to listen to that? Because I had PowerPoints prepared for them. So anyway, there's the Christmas story. The band is going to come back up here and play us a song. I'm going to show a video real quickly here. And does anybody know what time it actually is? What time do we start? Okay. We actually may make it under an hour. Okay, I'll stop talking. Show that beautiful bean footage.
All right. Let's see. Oh, it's behind us. Cool. There you go, Lisa. So we have one more song for you. First of all, we want to thank you for hanging out with us today. Hope you have a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, whatever you're celebrating this time of year. And I hope you've enjoyed your s'mores and candy. Make sure you take some candy home with you today. But until then, have yourself a merry little Christmas. You're welcome.
Have yourself a merry little Christmas. Make the Yuletide gay. From now on, your troubles will be miles away. Oh, merry little Christmas. May your day
Make it gay. From now on, your troubles will be miles away. Here we are as in golden days, happy golden days of yore. And we're near to us, travel near to us once more. There we go. Through the years, we always be together.
if the fates allow.
Hang a shining star upon the highest bough. So have yourself a merry little Christmas now. Thank you guys so much. Have some happy holidays. Drive safe on your way home. Oh, I'm sorry, Mark's gonna come here. I got excited. I'm in the mood for Christmas.
That's all we have for today. The poinsettias on the table, not these two on the stage, my wife says, but these on the tables, take them with you. I think they're poisonous if you feed them to certain animals, so whether you like them or not, do that or don't. But take the poinsettias, take the candy, take the little thing of fire if you want. It's all free. Thanks for hanging out with us today. We really love you guys. We hope you have a great Christmas. And we'll see you next year. Oh, by the way, don't leave yet. Hang on. If you'll look on our Facebook page and our website, stonebrook.tv, next year's schedule is on there where you can plan when we meet. We'll meet again January the 9th. Next year, Sunday, January the 9th. So be here. Have a great Sunday. Have a great Christmas.